Welcome back, everyone, to Getting in a College Coach Conversation. We touched on this slightly in the first segment, but in this next segment, we really want to talk about appropriate parental involvement in the application process. And joining me is my colleague, Lisa Albro, who's a former admissions officer at Goucher College, but also a former school counselor. So she has seen parental involvement from the college side, from the school side, and then, of course, from our side here at College Coach. Hi, Lisa.
Hi, good to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. Very excited. So this segment was actually an idea of yours, and I love it because there's a phrase that for all the school counselors who are listening to, or independent counselors who listen to the podcast, and there are quite a few, this phrase that we hear from parents sometimes, and parents, so we're going to let you behind the curtain on this one, is this concept of we are working on our applications. And someone said that to you and you thought, we should talk about this on the podcast because,
yes,
right? And that word, that phrasing, we are working on our applications kind of is a little bit of a nails on the chalkboard for those of us on this who do this work. But of course, parents often are going through this for the first time. They're not really thinking about it that way, right?
Yep.
So when you're thinking about this, what are some areas, and I think there are quite a few, right, where parents can be involved in an appropriate way? We are not working on the application. The student is working on their application, but there are things they can be doing. What are some things that you would suggest parents do if they're itching to be part of this process?
Yeah, and you're right, Beth, it's cringeworthy. It's nails on a chalkboard. And I used to hear it. I still do hear it often. My response would always be to a parent when I was in the school setting, with all due respect, are you going to go to college with him too? And make sure he does his homework and wake up, because, if you can't trust him to get his applications done, do you really feel comfortable sending your student away?
Right. 100%.
Yet I understand from the parent perspective, they're worried that what if he doesn't get this right, or if she doesn't get this right, if this doesn't go the way it should, then their chances are nil. They won't get into good colleges. It'll ruin their future, and it progresses into this ball of worry. And I always like to reassure parents that no, there are certain things that you can be involved with. I'm not saying to be hands off on everything. For example, for a student who's really, really busy, there might be some scheduling items that parents can take care of. There might be some proofreading that parents can do of elements of the application. No student should hit submit on an application without at least one pair of eyes checking it over, right? Crossing all the T's, dotting all the I's, making sure there's nothing completely amiss. Talking about their college choices at the very beginning, talking about where they're applying, and not just, yes, giving approval to some degree, but talking it through together as a conversation. So they're hearing their child, their student is hearing them. Parents can express their concern about maybe sending their student away to too distant a school. Students might not be interested in a place that a parent might want them to look at. So talking through their college choices and making sure they're clear on their reasons for applying to each school.
Right. And actually, for me, that's a big one. We talk about this a lot with parents, and ideally, this is not a conversation that they're having in September of their child's senior year. But for those of you, those parents who have not had this conversation, no time like the present. And that is, if realistically, you live in New York and you are not going to allow your student to go to college in California, or you can't afford for the travel back and forth for them to go that far from home, or really, if you have limitations in your mind about what's appropriate, you need to speak that before your child applies to schools that are outside of what your limitations are. And I have given this example, so I apologize to people who've heard it before, but when I was applying to college, I grew up on the East Coast, on the coast. My parents drew a semicircle within a 6-hour drive, and they said basically, anywhere within 6 hours, because we can't afford for you to fly anywhere, but we could drive to you in that amount of time. And so I limited my applications to that
Yes,
range, right? And
yes.
that seemed reasonable.
Absolutely. So communication is huge, and I
Yes,
don't see enough of that, unfortunately. Students have their own ideas and parents have their own ideas. They need to come together and talk those through so there isn't a big butting of heads and clash when those acceptances come in, or once applications go out and parents are seeing notifications and saying, why did you apply here? Or when students are getting ready to hit submit and they say, well, I need your credit card to apply to this school. Why are you
right.
applying here? Talk it through before that point.
Yes,
Right. Right.
please,
Yes.
please.
But also things that parents can continue to do, I think I mentioned scheduling, right? Any visits or interviews, students don't have to do that because that's not happening directly usually with the people who are making the decisions on their
Right,
application. So it's okay for parents to do that. Or if there's any sort of like housekeeping or follow-up once a student has submitted an application and they're getting notifications from colleges like items are missing or anything like that, parents can call the admission office and ask, to follow up, okay, is this received or what do we need to do to get this in? That's fine. No
right,
admission officer is going to say, oh, that's terrible, a parent shouldn't call here. That's okay. Getting them signed up for standardized tests, making sure they're submitting their scores if they are submitting scores, and if they have to submit official score reports, those are things parents can do, and it's okay. Certainly, I'm happy for students to take the rein on these things. I'm not saying that you have to divide these tasks, but if students are really busy,
yes,
there are some tick items that a parent can handle.
right.
I mentioned taking a look at the application, but
Yep.
also the essay at some point. I don't ever want a parent involved in the essay writing from the get-go, but a parent might be a good sounding board with a student trying to figure out what to write about, because
Hmm.
who knows you best but your own parents when you're the student, right? Um, but carefully I say this because sometimes I run into parents who have a very distinct idea of what they think a student should write, and that doesn't end up being the best representation of the student either. So
Yes.
I'm careful about how I
Yeah,
recommend parent involvement there.
I would agree, right? I
Yeah.
think a school counselor could be a great resource if you're, or obviously if you're working with an independent counselor, also a great resource. But parents dictating the topic, they don't have the perspective. They have great insight into the student, but not necessarily the admissions perspective. And so I agree. It's sort of like a tread lightly, like I'm almost hesitant to suggest this. It
Yes.
could be good, but it could be terrible. So
Yes. Yes.
I think the big message, right, is at least what I'm taking away from that is just you can be involved, but quietly, I guess, right?
Yes.
Like you
Right.
shouldn't be strident about anything is
Right.
maybe a good way to think about it.
Right. And we shouldn't see your voice or your fingerprints on any part of this application. If we're the admission reader and we're
Yes.
looking at this, we want to see your student. We don't want to get the sense that, I think maybe mom wrote some of this, or maybe, this doesn't sound like something a 17 or 18-year-old would say.
Right.
Certain phrasing, certain, even and our group has had this conversation many a time with the double space after the period. Some of us
Yes.
of a certain age are still inclined to do that because that's how we learned how to type in high school, and some of us are not willing to give that up. I'm in that camp. uh, so sometimes that's a big tell, right? When you're looking at an essay and you see a double space after a period, you'll kind of immediately know that somebody older might have written that.
Yeah.
So
Or at the very least, heavily edited it. Yes.
heavily edited it,
Yeah.
exactly. So be careful with this. What else can parents do? And I think I mentioned before, paying the application fees. Students, unless they're independently wealthy or willing to foot this bill, parents may need to help them out with that, and probably should.
Right.
And I think for moral support, when going to submit that application, I know a lot of my students don't want to be alone when they do this. It's a scary thing for some kids, and they just want to have somebody with them when they hit that submit button. And
Yes.
back in the day when we used to still work in brick and mortar offices, a lot of my students would schedule time to come into the office and sit there with their laptops with me, just to have somebody there with them before they
Right.
hit submit, just to, give it a once over again and just say, it's okay, don't worry, because sometimes it's a little scary once you hit that submit button, so
Yeah, no, 100%.
parents can do that.
And I would say, I can provide the visual. My son was sitting on the couch beside me. We had one laptop. It was his laptop. He would pass it to me so that I could enter my credit card information. And then I would pass it back to him and he would press submit and we'd cheer. And then we did it again. Like, so he
Yes.
applied to, I think, 8 schools. And we did that one. And it was, and, even like moral support, but also just what a moment and a wonderful moment in
Yes.
your child's life. If it shouldn't be so scary as it should be like, this is so cool. Look at you applying to college, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
I think that's a
Exactly.
great moment for parents to
Mhm.
be involved, but not pressing the button.
Right. Let your
So
student do it.
exactly. All right. So we've talked about all the many different ways in which parents can be involved.
Mhm.
One, and we have some things in which we would wish parents would not be involved. One big one that I want to throw at you that we actually did not talk about in advance, but came to mind when you were saying, the parent can call with follow up. Oh, if something's missing. One thing I would really encourage is if you get a note from the college saying that something is missing, the first thing to do is not call the school counselor screaming
Right.
at the top of your lungs that they haven't done their job.
Absolutely.
And you could speak to this, the lag, right? So tell us about what is probably going on there.
Yeah. So, as you know from having worked in an admission office, things don't just instantaneously appear in a student's file. Even though most are being submitted electronically now, there's some due diligence that the operations staff at the admissions side has to do. They have to log things in and sometimes physically handle things to make sure that it's logged into the file. So just because you press send doesn't mean it's automatically going to show in your file. So there
Right.
is a lag time. So between hitting submit on your application and seeing on the Common App that, okay, it's confirmed, I've sent this, great. Oh boy, they don't have my teacher recommendations yet. Oh, or, counselor recommendation or transcript, these things are missing. Yes, don't immediately jump and say, why isn't it there? Understand that it might very well be there. They just don't have
Right.
it logged in yet. And it takes a little bit of time for this to show up in your portal or in your Common App or whatever system you're using to see. And sometimes they will send out notifications saying, hi, we've received your application, but we're missing this, and
Yes.
that. And it was sent or you believe it was sent. Again, don't jump off and run to the counselor or pick up the phone and start calling the counselor and yelling at the counselor. It's not the counselor's fault. Almost 10 times out of 10, the item is already there.
Right. Right.
Right?
And appropriate, an email. Hey, we
Right.
got this notice.
Yep.
Can you just confirm that you sent
Yep.
everything? And we're just assuming there's whatever it is, there's a tone, right?
Yes.
So things not to do. Take a tone. There's no need for it. Take a deep breath. Things that probably, like you said, 10 out of 10 times, maybe 9.9 out of 10
9.9.
times.
Right.
It's
Exactly.
been done. It's been
Exactly.
done.
And having been the recipient of those ire ridden emails or voicemails or visits to my office many a time in my career as a school counselor, I have to say it's really unpleasant. And you did your job. You're doing your job. You sent something, and it's really hard to hear from from people that they're disappointed in you or they're upset and there's no reason to be.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So what are a couple, as we start to wrap it up, what are a few other areas in which you would love for parents to step away, step back?
Sometimes I see parents decide to add schools to a student's list after we've finalized a list, and it's always a shock to me. And sometimes I don't even hear about this until way down the road. Like, oh yeah, well, I have to do this essay now. Well, why are you doing this essay? Well,
Right.
my mom wants me to apply here, but we already finalized the list. Please don't do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Totally.
yeah, that's a big one, right? And this is one that you had brought up, and I was thinking of it too. Calling colleges on behalf of the student, pretending to be the student. I used to get
Yes.
those calls
I
sometimes,
did
and
too. I did too. Such a bad idea. Such a
yeah,
bad
yeah,
idea. I
it's
don't.
a optics are real bad on that. So parents, please do not pretend to be your student. If it's something they should be doing to pick up the phone and call, have them do it. But most of the time, it's not something that you have to worry about them doing most of the time. So,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
I mean, I think it's definitely an extreme example, but so not only can we tell because your voice is different, typically you don't sound like a teenager, but you also say things that teenagers wouldn't say. And
Yes.
it's just a bad call
Yes.
altogether. So and then, we talked about letting your child submit applications, and we talked a little bit, but can you once again, essays, like where's the line where you'd prefer parents not cross?
Yeah, I really don't want parents to dictate the topic. I think they can be helpful in some of the brainstorming. Sometimes when students are trying to come up with some ideas or to add some detail, sometimes parents have a memory of something that they can share. But I don't want them to be too hands-on with that.
Yeah.
That's just a kind of a minimal involvement. I think it's great when a parent can look at an essay that's solidly drafted, like student and counselor or student and essay coach or whoever they're working with have decided, okay, this is what I'm sending. I think for parents to look at it then and say, does this sound like you?
Mm-hmm.
That's where I want parental input. I'm not looking to parents to change it or edit it or alter it, but to say, I'm reading this and I hear your voice in this essay.
Right.
I think this is authentic to who you are.
Right. And if you don't, then to say, hey, you probably should sound more like you.
Right.
Absolutely. Lisa, thank you so much for joining today. I thought this was really helpful. I love the perspective you also bring from having been a school counselor. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. And when we get back, we are talking about all of the different acronyms and early programs that are out there so that you know what you're getting yourself into. So don't go away.